Well, hey guys, my name is Toby, and today we are going to talk about the age-old question: should you upgrade to the Fujifilm 16 to 55 if you already own the 18 to 55? And I just want to give you my perspective because I just shot a wedding as a video shooter on my own, and not something I prefer to do or like to do. But this tool, the 16 to 55, ended up being pretty much on the camera the whole time, shooting on the X-T4, and really saw some of the benefits of this kind of upgrade and want to give you my perspective on that. So before I talk about the 16 to 55, let me just say a little bit, give a little love to the 18 to 55, because it's very likely you maybe got it as part of a package, or you see them for pretty relatively affordable on the used market. And honestly, this little lens is excellent. You've probably heard that before. Maybe you bought it in a package and thought about selling it yourself. And I think for video shooting, it is well worth keeping if you're going to shoot any video at all. First of all, it is lighter. It is very, very significantly lighter. When it comes to travel, having a second lens in the bag, maybe you have one of the primes and you have that on, but just to have something in the back where you need something either a little wider or a little more telephoto, this is a great option to have. And also to put on a gimbal. Now, I did end up flying this on the Weebill S, but that's only because I had to upgrade to the Weebill S. I had the original Zoom crane, and it certainly wasn't going to handle the size and bulk of the 16 to 55. This little guy is awesome. It has, of course, image stabilization, which this does not. It has really good autofocus. I think I would say they are about on par. And so for street photography, for when you're just on a trip, when you want to shoot video, I think this is a fantastic lens. It's also really good range from 18 to 55. And I think that's why it's, when I'm heading out for a trip, maybe with family, and want to grab some footage, this is 100% the lens I pick. I very rarely use this for my personal projects. For weddings, yes. For just to carry in my bag, no thank you. And with the aperture, which I suppose is one of the big differences, and accounts for the size, it goes from 2.8 at the wide end, and then at the telephoto end, f4, and there it kind of gradually reduces the aperture as you zoom. That's really some of the disadvantage. But I think, there's some workarounds. First of all, for a zoom lens of this range, a kit lens, you might say, or they say, f2.8 on your wide end is really good. And so if you want to treat this like a prime lens, or if you're in an environment where it's not well lit and it's a bit darker, stick to 18 millimeters, which, by the way, happens to be around the focal length of our phones. So we're very, very used to this focal length. It's about 27, 28 millimeter full frame equivalent. F2.8 is pretty good, and if you are okay with cranking the ISO, it's really not bad. And then at the telephoto end, f4 at 55 millimeters is quite good. In daylight, you can get a nice portrait look out of this lens, and the effect, especially if you are flying on a gimbal, to get from your wide end all the way to your telephoto end, where you can get that parallax effect and get your subject pretty still but the background moving. With this lens, it's great. And like I said, it's much easier to balance and deal with on a gimbal, throw in your bag. Lots of love for this 18 to 55. If you're thinking of selling it, I would say don't sell it. Just keep it. I mean, I know some people were like, I shoot primes and that's it. Still a fantastic lens, and one that I used professionally. Shot weddings with over these last 2 years at least, before I decided to pick up the 16 to 55. So let's talk about this big brother for a little bit. First, let me say it's a very versatile focal range. And you know this because it's right on the lens. It's 16 to 55. 16 on the wide end is that full frame equivalent of 24, of course. And that is where I would say those 2 millimeters getting a little wider makes a big difference. Because when you are in a scenario, maybe you're in a smaller room or you're in close, you you can in some cases step in to get a shot, but you can't always step back. And that's where having 16 millimeters on the wider end really do count. And I also consider that if you do shoot in 4K 60 frames per second, that adds that 1.18 times crop. So that means your 16 is increased a little more. It's actually more telephoto than 16, and likewise your 18. So that is really going to make a difference. Let me just put this on. All right, so this is 16 millimeters. At my desk, you can see a lot more of the walls on each side and the ceiling. I was shooting on a 23 millimeter before. And just to punch in a little bit, this would be at 1.18 times crop. So if you're shooting in a 4K 60, then this is really as wide as you're going to get. Now here's the 18 millimeters. So here's the 18 millimeters, also at f2.8, so actually they're matched in that sense. And you can see right away I've lost the table on this side. Still quite wide compared to the 23, and then if we punch in that 1.18 times, this is where we're at. So a very subtle difference, but again, for video for 4K 60 with that crop, it's going to even make a bigger difference. And I would say 24 has or 16 millimeters has just a wider feel to it compared to this 18 millimeters. All right, back to the 23 millimeter, just so I can have these in hand. We've talked about the wider end, 18 millimeter versus 16 millimeter. Let's talk about the telephoto end, 55 millimeter, which they both reach to. But this is where that constant f2.8 and that light gathering ability do really make a difference. Especially, of course, if you're in a low light situation, which I did find myself in. Felt a little uncomfortable almost. We were in in a tent, outdoor tent, but mostly by candlelight, and I had to live with the f2.8. But compared to having f4 or even f3.5 or something like that, this is going to make a difference in how much you have to crank your ISO. So again, this is going to affect that. And I would just say, even just for adjusting exposure on the fly, I'm usually, or for weddings, I was using manual exposure. And so having a variable aperture, which of course this is, means there's too many variables, because as you zoom, it's changing. So what I often found is actually when I'm using the 18 to 55, I would set it to f4. So for that convenience and for the ability to change the exposure on the fly, I was actually sacrificing some of the light gathering ability on the wider end because I chose to use f4 as a constant zoom, whereas this really does pay off in terms of having that light gathering ability at f2.8 at 55 millimeter, which I think explains partly, at least, why this is so much bigger and so much heavier than the 18 to 55. So in summary, it is a big decision and investment, especially if this did come with your kit or the kit you bought, or you can find it for that $400 or $500 range, whereas this retails upwards of over $1,000. Also probably available used where you are. And I would say, again, to keep on singing the praises of this 18 to 55, unless you're going to be using it in a very specialized or perhaps professional, or you're ready to kind of lug this kind of weight and bulk, I would say stick to the 18 to 55. And if you don't already have one, you can find one for a pretty good deal. On the other hand, with this lens with the X-T4, which of course has in-body image stabilization, and again the versatility of it when you are shooting in on your own, to have this range is really something special, because while we think of this as a 24-70 equivalent of the full frame equivalent lenses, and it certainly has that kind of bulk, this is actually not a 24-70. This is a 24-82 or 82.5 or something like that. So it's actually giving you that much more telephoto capability on the longer end, which really allows you to get from a wide environmental perspective shot and then zoom, punch right in quite close into a portrait shot. And as a wedding videographer, this is definitely been worth its weight in, well, I wouldn't say gold, maybe Bitcoin, I don't know. Well, thanks for watching. If you have any questions about these lenses or the other lenses I use, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.